when it comes to questions like religion, what we're trying to find out is what is true about reality. We are not just trying to find a religious club that makes us feel good. Remember, it was Marx that said religion is the opiate of the people. That is, religion is what you take to make you feel better. It's a drug. It doesn't have any benefit in itself apart from lifting your spirits and making you feel better about the world. Now, of course, if what religion tells you isn't true about the world, then I'm not sure why it lifts anybody's spirits to believe something that is not true. But in any event, that's the way a lot of people approach it. It's relativistic. And so if we're instead asking the proper question, what is the world actually like? What is true about the nature of the world? If that's our question, and we are open to a religious answer, in other words, well, maybe some religion is a true characterization of the way the world actually is, then I think there is a question that is pivotal to start the process. And that question simply is, does God exist? And the reason I think that question is so critical is because it becomes a watershed for two entirely different directions that you might go. And I've talked about this before. In fact, I've written about this in more detail in Street Smarts, talking about atheism, because I am of the conviction that atheism doesn't explain anything. It's the ultimate non-explanation. It explains, so to speak, by denying that explanations exist. Why is there something rather than nothing, for example? No reason. What caused everything? Nothing. What accounts for morality? Well, there is no morality to account for, no capital M morality, no deep morality. There could be beliefs about morality that evolution has tricked us to believe in for some evolutionary benefit, but that's not real morality. That's just a false view about reality that is a trick, put simply. All right? Why is there evil in the world? There is no real evil in the world since there's no real morality. What's wrong with the world? Nothing. It just is. How do we fix the world? Well, we can't fix what's not broken. We can only make it more tolerable to our personal tastes. Now, I realize that I painted a rather dark picture of atheism, but the portrayal is true to the worldview. And I want you to listen to these words from the great 20th century British philosopher and atheist, Bertrand Russell, because he put it candidly. He said that man, now remember, he is committed to the notion of atheism. And so therefore, this comment will be in light of his understanding that there is no God. And here's what he says. That man is the product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving. There was no goal, there was no purpose. That his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms, physicalism, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave, that all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Dark, right? Painfully honest? Sure. Accurate? Completely. On a materialistic view of the universe. Because things just are. Nothing more. No explanation for anything important. no purpose for anything dear to us. Rather, universal stillness, what I call nothingism, also known as nihilism. Nothing to build on other than Russell's, as he's put it in other places, quote, firm foundation of unyielding despair, close quote. All this to say that the answer to the God question is what dictates one of two trajectories, and they lead in opposite directions. What is it that determines which direction? I should say, what's the significance? Because it tells us who's in charge. The creature or the creator, the potter or the clay. And if there is no creator, then it's all the creature. We are in charge. And this is what existentialism essentially claims. There is no meaning out there. The only meaning is what meaning we create for ourselves. And by the way, that can be any meaning. Because at this point, we have to be very careful, the atheist has to be careful, of not smuggling in some kind of detail that is not inherent or not appropriate for their atheistic, materialistic worldview. But this happens all the time. They end up smuggling in moral values, moral virtues, meaning, etc., in subtle fashions that are not part of their worldview. I'm thinking of Sam Harris, for example, when he talks about the moral project, and he's trying to make sense of the moral project, what human beings do, these moral behaviors or these moralistic or moral-like behaviors, these moral motions, that's the phrase that Francis Schaeffer used, the moral motions we go through, what's going on there? Now, in my view, if atheism is true and materialism is true, moral motions are nothing more than motions to which we apply meaning. They don't have any meaning, not any moral substance. And what Sam Harris tries to do is tries to provide a characterization of morality that is somewhat objective and not subjective in light of his commitment to materialism. Now, his project doesn't work for a number of reasons, but part of it is the starting point. He says that we all can agree that morality is about human flourishing. Okay, stop right there. Even if we all agreed, what have we done? We have imported a moral good into an explanation of morality itself. Now, what he's going to say is we can have objective standards to determine what will allow us to flourish, and therefore we can set up a morally objective system, and he thinks science is at our service in that regard. But now you can have an objective set of standards for our flourishing, which is a moral good. But he has not established why human flourishing is a moral good. What has he done? He's carried that in. He's borrowed that. He's stolen that, to use Frank Turek's characterization, stealing from God. He's stolen that from another world view and imported that into his own where it does not fit. Okay, now I'm not saying he's wrong about being an atheist, and I'm right as a theist. I'm simply saying, notice what's going on. There are certain things that are entailed by commitments to worldview. And if your commitment is to atheism, then something like what Bertrand Russell said applies. And it's not just Russell. Richard Dawkins famously, I don't think I have the citation here. Let me just check. No, I don't have it handy. But famously said that we live in the kind of world that's exactly what we'd expect if there was no God. Now, what's curious about the paraphrase I'm going to give you is that I don't think it's a good characterization of our world, but it clearly is the kind of world that would be if atheism were true. And he says that there is no design, there is no purpose, there is no good, there is no evil. There is nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Now, that's what he sees in the world. That's not what I see, but that's what he sees. And therefore, that is a view that is fully consistent with atheism. So atheism turns out to be in a certain sense, the non-answer. Okay, it's an answer that explains by denying explanations exist. We are just here, and everything is just the way it is, and that's all you can say about it. You can't even say that human flourishing is a good, because what does human flourishing even look like? You realize that the notion of human flourishing looks different to different people, depending on their moral convictions or their understandings of the nature of the universe. Human flourishing for a materialist is probably something akin to feeling good and feeling pleasure and feeling enjoyment. So it is a hedonistic kind of element that marks the good, but it's only the good because it identifies feeling good, a pleasant feeling. But, we've reflected all kinds of things that people do that feels good to them in the moment, which clearly do not seem to be good. And we object to that. Think of all the people who are taking advantage of sexual slavery, all the clients who are taking advantage of those sexual slaves. Does it feel good to them? Does that uplift them in some fashion? Yes, that's why they're doing it. It's satisfying for them. So why would that not be an example of human flourishing? Well, because it's taking advantage of somebody else. But wait a minute, now you just imported a moral element that you first have to justify before you can impose it on the circumstance. And you're not going to be able to justify the idea that we ought not take illicit advantage of another person if you're a materialist. In fact, this is where social Darwinism came from. Darwin, it was survival of the fittest, right? To put it very simply, it's more complex than that, obviously. And so the idea of applying that in a more thoroughgoing way to all of human existence is called social Darwinism. Okay, the strong rule the weak. And, of course, we've seen a lot of examples of that, especially from government dictatorships where God is not a factor. So the God question is going to be the watershed. It dictates one of two trajectories that lead in opposite directions, as I said, based on who is in charge. It's the most decisive issue of life because the answer you give to that one question sets an irrevocable course for everything that follows. And that's why, in my opinion, dealing with atheism or addressing that question or answering that particular question about the existence of God is a kind of a structural starting point for all world views. And when you think about it, all the big questions then, issues of origin and meaning and morality, as I've referred to, destiny. Well, there is no destiny is an end, right? Is what one is destined for, or at least one ought to be destined for, a place that you should go, a noble end, a noble purpose, generally speaking, that is in the future, that is a target you're aiming at. But if atheism is true, there is no destiny because there are no noble ends. Being a noble end is a moral concept. There's no grounding for morality in atheism. Now, I'm not saying that atheists are all immoral. What I'm saying is, atheists can do, to a great extent, the very same kinds of things that non-atheists do, that non-atheists called moral. What I'm saying is, and this is a very important distinction, if there is no God, then the atheists are not doing anything moral, nor are the theists doing anything moral. They are doing behaviors, but they are not doing moral behaviors.